The main fear everyone has is the fear of being overwhelmed. And therefore you want to keep things under control. Now, there are different ways that you can be overwhelmed. If you're resonating in chakra 1, you're most afraid of being overwhelmed by anxiety. Or paranoia. Dread, melancholia. And dismemberment, which just happened to a guy in Istanbul recently. But the chakra 1 fear of dismemberment or loss of control of one's body, because as an infant it takes you a long time to get motor control of your body, and the terror of being helpless. Think of being a baby in a crib. You can't even turn over. There's nobody there. You're all alone, right? So we should add, of course, abandonment. And of course, abandonment means that you could face various kinds of evil. Or, as in this visualization, hunger. And of course, death. So, the chakra 1 fears of being overwhelmed are always lying just below the surface of the ego. And the evil, of course, can be represented by darkness. Very often people are afraid of the dark. Even scary music can do it, can put you into that state. Or obviously horror films or visualizations, even like this. One can be overwhelmed by all kinds of things if one is resonating in chakra 1. Because fear is the overriding affect that controls the ego mind.
Chakra 1?
Chakra 1, yeah.
In particular, though, fear is the overriding affect, or fear is the
Well, there's fear of overwhelm at every chakra level. But let's say these kinds of fears that refer to real one, death, dismemberment of the body, right? The terrors of the bodies being destroyed. It's much. You don't really have so much of a fear of madness in chakra 1. That's more of a chakra 3 fear. Which is why you can go mad in chakra 1. You can choose psychosis, actually, and it doesn't feel scary. To somebody who has made it to a neurotic state, there's a terror of going mad. But going mad is an escape route. And so many people will, obviously, they do choose that. So that's one way out of your fear. Okay. Chakra 2, obviously, there's a fear of being overwhelmed. There's a desire to flirt with being overwhelmed, but you can be overwhelmed by passion and the fantasies that accompany it, and that can lead to real one episodes, events, like rape and like being killed. Passion murders happen all the time, and various other fears that people have around sexuality, shame and guilt and impotence, incompetence, rejection, all kinds of things, right? So this is an area that people want to feel desire for, but there's an equal amount of terror of chakra 2 as there is of desire for it. Chakra 3, of course, one is afraid that one could enter a state of berserk fury in which you can't get out of it. I mean, this happens. Isn't this O.J. Simpson, right? But the worst thing is, if you really go berserk totally, you become a wild animal, you're going to be killed, right? Sooner or later, the cops are going to come and shoot you. That's just the way it happens, right? And there are all these people going berserk every day. We see it in the newspapers. Sometimes they're put up by government special ops to do it, but a lot of times it's just a freelance berserker in chakra 3. And again, it feels totally all-powerful. You're omnipotent until the bullet hits you and you're dead. But in that berserk fury, you try to be the one who is overwhelming the other. And therefore you are finally free of your fear of being overwhelmed, right? But of course it's a cover-up. It's not the real thing. So, but there's a fear that also lurks in every ego that this could happen. You could do this. If you were triggered in the right way, you could go berserk. Man or woman, doesn't matter. So that capacity is also something that a lot of people are really concerned with keeping under control, right? For some people, it's miles away. Yeah, sure. I mean, I would have to be in a pretty extreme situation. But for some people, it's, oh no, you say the wrong thing to me, look at me the wrong way, and I could go there, right? So how close people are to that varies according to ego structure and traumatic background. But all of these are fears of being overwhelmed by drives, by forces that you cannot control, that can destroy you. Yeah, go ahead.
Would you say like the more, maybe like one's parents went berserk, there's more of that feeling that...
Oh yeah, that's right. Then you know it's real. It's not just a theory. And you have, of course, taken in some of their energy. So their berserk psychotic fragments are in you. They have been replicated. And you had to replicate them as a defense. So, yeah, it's been activated. Somebody who has a very copacetic childhood that's, always treated with great kindness and very upper-class comforts or that kind of thing won't have that, probably. But it's always still there at some level. But if it's close to the surface, then it's also going to bring the chakra 1 anxieties close to the surface, right? Yeah.
A few questions. Will that necessarily, if one has it, always come up to the surface when they're in a process like this? I mean, I'm assuming it must.
Of course.
And would you say, like, I know we've got many ways of working on it, the whole trivium, but I really love what you said about the death, like watching with absolute hyper-concentration, if one can, the passing of these. I'm thinking about Drive right now, his death in the guided med. But is that another way to look at dealing with these drives when they're coming up? If one can, of course, I know that means containing it, to watch it.
Yeah, of course, that's what you want to do, is you want to be the driver, not the driven, right? But the one who has the fear of being overwhelmed is fear that you will be driven into some state of terror that you will not be able to get out of. And if your body is dying, you may go into that rather than a state of, okay, I'm going to prepare to reach the mother light and I will be free and bliss. Very often that will not be the reaction to finding yourself, dying of thirst in a desert, and something else will take over, right? So you don't have any control, and you don't have any knowledge of how you will react if and when such an event happens. So now I want to talk about how do we get out of this trap. If you have a sufficient amount of knowledge, you will know how to deal with any situation that arises. That's the purpose of knowledge. Knowledge is power. If knowledge didn't give you the capacity to cope, then it would be without value. Its value is that it enables you to navigate those situations and deal with them with the utmost empowerment and with grace. Okay? You know how to receive the grace, to activate it. What is knowledge? Information plus intelligence. Okay? Now, I'm going to postulate that all of reality is made up of simply those two aspects. Knowledge of reality is the information about all that is, and all that is just information, and the intelligence to understand it accurately. And if you have complete understanding of all of the information of the cosmos, you're in God consciousness. If you have the intelligence, the infinite intelligence that knows how to make divine order out of all of this. So if you can combine those two and hold them and contain them, and the information you have includes how to deal with the death of the body and what happens afterwards and all of that. If you have that information and you understand that you've been there before and this is not something new or strange, you have that information and the intelligence to know that through following a certain principle of presence and of realization of the truth, you will be safe. If you know that, then you are victorious. That's the whole point of spiritual training, is to increase your knowledge of the supreme reality, which includes and encompasses and pervades this phenomenal plane. Now, when we talk about information, we get it from three sources. Real one is information we get through the nerves of the physical body. The information we get through the nerves, that includes the nerves of the eyes and the ears and all the senses, right? We're getting a constant flood of sensory information. And the skin, and our whole body is just a very rich information receptor. But the information we receive can produce pleasure, intense pleasure, or it can produce pain, intense pain. Right? So we're in that spectrum of information that if we do not have enough intelligence about, creates fear. Because there's terror of being overwhelmed, both by very intense pain and very intense pleasure. Because pleasure at its most intense becomes terrifying pain. So, that's real one. Real two gives us information from the heart. At the lower levels of the heart, it's going to give us affect, emotions. It's going to give us information about our feelings about reality. Now, that information can actually be more scary than real one information. And most people have repressed more real two information than real one information. Because you can fear having too much information. You can also fear having too little information. It's much wiser to fear having too little than having too much, right? I would much prefer knowledge to ignorance. But if there are things you don't want to know because they would change your relationships with other people in a way that would not be pleasant, would force you to see flaws or betrayals or other aspects of who they are, or of yourself and how you have acted that you've suppressed or repressed. And it would cause you to feel emotions of shame, of guilt, of hatred, of fury, of sadness, of abandonment, whatever, then you're not going to want that real two information. It's too unbearable to know that you were treated with such emotional disdain, perhaps, or uncaring pseudo-love. Right? So that remains suppressed, or it comes up, but one doesn't really get it. One doesn't mobilize that information in order to change their frame of reference and escape from the trap of having to remain crippled by remaining in ignorance. Because ignorance is the crippling of the soul. Your information is life. The more information you have, the more power you have. And the more capacity you have to reach God consciousness. And especially if you've closed off real two, you've closed off your access to divine love. And most people will do that if they've had too much toxic pseudo-love in childhood. And then they're afraid of anything that is close to being love, because love is the danger. And the alarm bells go off the more one is becoming vulnerable to loving again and making the same mistake, quote unquote, that they made before, that perhaps brought about abuse of some kind in childhood, or emotional abandonment, or a sense of one shouldn't be alive because one wasn't wanted by one's parents. Maybe one's an accident. Maybe one parent accepts you but another doesn't, or maybe they wanted a different gendered child than how you came out, and whatever it is that you were not accepted unconditionally, and the torment that produces in the soul that must be repressed, if it isn't processed and released, keeps one in an emotionally crippled state. And the only way out of that, of course, is to get real three information, but that leads to what the ego considers the ultimate catastrophe of annihilation in the absolute. It's not looking for liberation. It's looking for more pleasure that's controllable and a sense of being loved and normalcy. It doesn't want liberation because, as we said before, that locks it out of the enjoyment of the phenomenal illusion. And that's what you came here to enjoy, right? So who wants to be liberated from it? It's not why you came here. You came here to experience everything that life could offer. And now you're telling me I should let it go and choose God over life and all of its pleasures? Ridiculous idea. to most egos. And yet, at a certain point, one comes to the realization that the more information you have, the more intelligence you will have. Okay, the amount of intelligence that is activated is determined by the amount of information you accept and are willing to process. And of course, the amount of intelligence you have will be determined by how much information you want. So these two are always in a relationship of both seeking and hiding. And this peekaboo game that goes on is what obsesses the consciousness more than anything else. Do you want to know or do you not want to know? You see, if you know too much, you can't be naive anymore. You can't live in the imaginary. You can't live a normal ego life any longer. You can't do it. You've outgrown it. But you're not there yet wanting annihilation either, and there's nobody offering divine love, and you're not sure that's what you want. You want jouissance, you know. So how do you deal with the fact that it's almost impossible to make a decision to choose the real three information that will liberate you from the fear of overwhelm? Because the absolute will never be overwhelmed. It's the only position that will not be overwhelmed. But if you are the absolute, then there is nothing else. The fun and games are over.
What you gave examples of real one information, real two information, real three you defined as annihilation in the absolute.
Well, first it's emptiness, right? And the emptiness is like, to the ego, when it approaches the emptiness, it's terrified. It will be alone in an empty void without any ability to commune with anyone. It will be in absolute solitude, abandoned forever, and not have any resource to assuage its loneliness, right? That's the way it looks at it, because it hasn't yet been annihilated into the emptiness, and that very annihilation then brings the fullness, the realization that the emptiness was actually fullness. But you can be terrified of the fullness, as you were overwhelmed by Shakti, too much of it, right? Too much Shakti will also annihilate the ego. But then the question is this: the energy that would annihilate you, or the ego, what is the source of that energy? Isn't it your own mind? Haven't you divided your own mind into an overwhelming power and an overwhelmed infant who can't deal with it? But are they really two? Aren't you just the intelligence and the information that produces the energy? Energy is derivative of information. Once you have enough intelligence, you use the information to produce energy or to produce whatever you want within this illusion. There are all kinds, depending on the amount of intelligence you have, will determine what you're able to do with the information, but you will be able to overcome whatever obstacles ignorance has caused. And to the absolute, there are no obstacles. So therefore, there's nothing to be afraid of, there's nothing to desire, there's bliss, right? But if you are looking at the absolute from the relative and saying, I ain't going there, because that's death. And in chakra 1, you don't want death. You may want to die, but you want to die without having to face death. That's why a lot of people kill themselves with sleeping pills, right? Then I don't have to be there. Body dies and I'm in sleep, and they hope there's nothing to follow. Of course there is. That's the big mistake in judgment. But nonetheless, that's why people choose that way out. So, given this situation, what to do?